The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they decided to take wives from among them. The women conceived and gave birth to giants. And when we say giants, we're talking individuals who are 9 to 15 feet tall. Even according to the Smithsonian's own records, there were people of unusually large stature. Newspapers all over the country were reporting the remains of gigantic humanoids, of giants. They would dig up these bones, and they would often find pendants around the neck, bracelets. He found 3 skeletons. All of them were at least 9 feet long, and the next morning they were gone. Nobody knows what happened to the bones. So, getting to the topic of the giants, you referenced Genesis 6. And this is one of the references to the sons of God, is in Genesis 6. Yeah. That the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they decided to take wives from among them. Yeah. And they copulated with them. And the women conceived and gave birth to giants. This is what's being referenced in Genesis 6. And I think that that story, that narrative, is elaborated on in the book of Enoch, First Enoch, which we talked about last time.
Yeah.
And that story, the gods descending to the earth, copulating with becoming enamored of human women, copulating with them, the women conceive and give birth to giants. That's like the flood myths. It's ubiquitous. Yep. Across all of the primary civilizations on Earth.
So now, are they, because some would read that and say, well, this is, describing the age of the heroes or something, or it doesn't literally mean physically gigantic. But
well, according to the Bible, they're giants.
Yeah, sure. Do these beings relate to, reports of some giant skeleton found in North America or something? Or no, is that different?
Yes. So
trying to tie it all into like the little guys in Peru and all, is it the same thing?
No, I don't know that I could tie it into that specifically.
Yeah. But at least the big guys in North America.
So in Genesis 6, you read that the Nephilim, the giants, were in the earth in those days, and also after that. And then when you read the Old Testament, you find this allusion to the antediluvian, the pre-flood giants that resulted from the sons of God breeding with the daughters of men and producing this hybrid race of giants. Yeah. Again, that story is there's an expanded version of that story in the book of Enoch, and then you have giants in the post-flood world. You have the giants who are inhabiting the Promised Land. Yeah. Who Joshua is contending with. Joshua and the Hebrews are contending with giants in the Promised Land. Yeah. Of course, you have Goliath and so forth, and you have giants. You have legends of giants all over the earth. Yeah. And so, yes, I do believe that those giants, that's the lineage of the original giants from the pre-flood world. That those are the Nephilim, or the offspring, the descendants of the Nephilim, and they have various names, like the different descendants of the Nephilim in the Old Testament, like the Anakim, for example, and so those giants are the direct relatives of the original ones that were produced through the union of angels and humans, the sons of God and the daughters of men.
So then the ones that people dig up now all over the world, they would have died pre-flood, or no?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, the giants that the ancient Hebrews contended with were after the flood. And I mean, so here in the United States, back at the turn of the 20th century, newspapers all over the country were reporting the discovery of the remains of gigantic humanoids, of giants, primarily being discovered in the mounds. And at one time there was tens of thousands of mounds east of the Mississippi. And in some of those mounds, even according to the Smithsonian's own records, there were the remains of people of unusually large stature were discovered. And some of this is documented right in the Smithsonian's records. Yeah. And nobody knows what happened to the bones. I suspect that they've been secreted away to some repository that the Smithsonian has somewhere, probably in Washington, D.C. And you find similar accounts all over the world. I mean, I've investigated giants in various parts of the world, Peru as well, And in Peru, there's, the history of the conquest of Peru comes from a collection of documents that were written by the priests, primarily by the priests who came to the New World after the conquest, or who came with the conquistadors.
Oh, right. You're not saying not the indigenous priests of
No,
paganism,
the Catholic priests who came over, and they were involved in an enterprise to extirpate idolatry in Peru.
Yeah.
And these are the records from which we derive the history of the conquest of the Inca Empire. Those same historical documents.
Yeah.
And this is just to give you an example of how pervasive this is. And I was in Peru investigating giants and megaliths and stuff like that years ago. And I met with a well-known, a prestigious archaeologist. He at the time, he was giving, not at the time that I met with him, but he was about to travel to Washington, D.C. and give a lecture on the Inca. His last name was De la Vega. And I remember interviewing him in a coffee shop in Puno. And I asked him, are there any references to giants in the historical records of Peru?
Yeah.
And the historians, and they have access to the digital files of the originals, right? They're in a library in Lima. And he goes, I don't think so. I'm not familiar with any of that. I said, okay. So I go back to my hotel, and the next morning we're getting ready to leave and head out to film something. And he comes walking into the hotel, and he's got a big smile on his face, and he said, you got me wondering about this question of whether or not there's accounts of giants in the historical record. So I went into the record, into the digital files, and I did a search just to see. And he said, I can't believe how many accounts there are of giants in the historical record. He said, this is just a sample of them. I quickly highlighted some for you, and he gave me a CD. And when I looked at the CD, it was all these different chroniclers.
Yeah.
From different periods, from the days of the immediately following the conquest in the 1530s, all the way up to like the 1600s, and he had gone in and highlighted. And this wasn't this was not all of them. This was just the ones that he quickly went in and found for me because he was curious. And there were dozens of references to the bones of giants that were discovered all over Peru. And we're not talking about giant sloths. We're not talking about dinosaur bones.
Yeah.
We are clearly talking about humanoids.
And St. Augustine, I mentioned St. Augustine earlier. St. Augustine claims to have discovered the tooth of a giant, a molar of a giant. Says it would be the size of 50 human molars or something like that.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. In one case, a specific example, I believe this comes from the records, and I could be wrong about this, from a priest named Arriaga. I could be wrong about, there was a bunch of different guys who wrote in the aftermath of the conquest, whose works, that's the historical documentation from which we derive the history of the conquest of Peru. And in this particular case, after the Spaniards conquered Peru, in the wake of that conquest came two groups. You had the representatives of the Church of Rome, the priests, and then you had, coming with them, you had the representatives of the Spanish crown. They were called the visitadores. And so these individuals came to Peru. The priests were interested, obviously, in converting the populace to Catholicism, and the visitadores were there to keep an eye on things for the King of Spain, because there was something called the royal fifth. A fifth of all the treasure had to go back to the crown, right? So they were there, and they were making very meticulous records, right? And there was a program of extirpation of idolatry. In other words, the extermination of idolatry among the indigenous people in Peru. And it was systematic. They would go from town to town, and what they would do, the priests, the visitadores, and their cadre of whoever was with them, probably soldiers and so forth. And they would go into a village, and they would inquire of the indigenous people. They would want to know what their waka was. Yeah. And a waka in Peru is a sacred place. It could be an object. It could be a place. It's what the indigenous people are worshiping. What they're venerating. And so they, in often cases, they're idols, right, or altars or something like this. And so in this program of extirpation of idolatry, they would identify what's being worshipped, and then they would destroy it. right? The priests and the visitadores are there because they're also collecting artifacts of gold and silver, whatever else. And they are meticulously recording these events. And in one case, they walked into a village, and it's usually like an idol that they burn or an altar, like I said, that they'll destroy. But in this one particular case, they walk into a village, and they inquire of the villagers, of the indigenous people, what their waka was. Where are their gods that they're worshiping? And because they didn't see any altar, and there was no indication of what they were worshiping, and the natives told them that their waka or their idols were in a cave.
Yeah.
So the priest and the visitadores, the representatives of the crown, they went into the cave. And they record that, the priest specifically records that when they went into the cave, the first thing they encountered was, and this are his words, dead Gentiles laying on the ground. And they surmised that they had been sacrificed.
Yeah.
So they penetrate further into the cave, and what do they find? They find that the villagers were worshiping 3 gigantic corpses that had been seated, like they're seated in a sitting position, and they're dressed in cumbia. And cumbia is like the traditional garb of the indigenous people. And I don't remember if it was Arriaga, but it was one of the priest records that the bodies were 6 times the size of a normal man. And they had the bodies removed from the cave and burned in the village. That's right out of the same documents that we derive the history of the conquest of Peru. And that's just one of dozens of examples of the bodies of giants being discovered in Peru post-conquest. And the same can be said, and it's very reminiscent of what was happening here in the United States with the Smithsonian and some of that. Now some of that, and I think we need to make a note here that some of the accounts of giants being discovered in the mounds, maybe even the majority of the accounts, were sensationalized.
Yeah, of course.
Because back in the, back at the turn of the century, here in America, obviously the newspapers, there's a lot of competition.
Go to goodranchers.com, use code Knowles, Knowles. Summer is here. You know you love firing up the grill with family and friends, but what you might not know is that over 85% of grass-fed beef in U.S. stores is actually imported. That means it could be from anywhere with questionable safety standards, hidden additives. Don't do it. That's one of the reasons you should switch to Good Ranchers for all the summer grilling. The main reason is the meat is better than any meat you're going to get anywhere else. The second reason is the prices are better than you're going to get anywhere else. The third reason is that these people support you and what you believe, and they support America. The fourth reason is you don't need to worry about that imported stuff. Every single cut, beef, chicken, pork, 100% American sourced, born, raised right here on local family farms. No antibiotics ever, no added hormones, no seed oils. Delivered straight to your door, no more last minute grocery runs when you're prepping the weekend cookout. I just love it. It's the best meat you're gonna get. The other night, sweet little Elisa took some of the Wagyu burgers and turned them into, the burgers are great on their own, but she turned them into these interesting little kebab kind of things. You can do a lot with it. It's all magnificent. Get any Good Ranchers box. When you subscribe right now, you should subscribe to my box, but when you subscribe to any Good Ranchers box, you get your choice of free meat for life. That's free Wagyu burgers, hot dogs, bacon, or chicken wings in every single box. Get the Wagyu burgers. Use code Knowles, KNWLES, at checkout. Get an extra $40 off. GoodRanchers.com, code Knowles, $40 off plus free meat for life. It's the moments that matter deserve meat that's made right. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered.
Private revelation and miracles really do happen and are inexplicable by natural means. And also, plenty of people dream things up and have hoaxes. The fact that there are hoaxes and hallucinations does not negate the fact that there's
no, and I have no doubt.
thing.
And I have no doubt that although there was a lot of sensationalization happening in the periodicals back at the turn of the century, a lot of those stories were true. Certainly the ones that were recorded by the Smithsonian itself, right?
Right. I
went to Sardinia. I've investigated giants on the island of Sardinia on 3 separate occasions.
Yeah.
And Sardinia is ground zero for anyone who's interested in investigating giants, or at least it used to be. Because in Sardinia, you have people, or you did, at least a decade or so ago when I was there, and I've been back and forth, but I was interviewing a lot of the villagers in Sardinia. A lot of the people living in Sardinia, by the way, is the island south of Corsica. It's part of Italy. It's
But it's kind of its own
Western
thing.
Mediterranean.
They're Italian sort of, but
They're
it's kind of
Italian,
its own thing.
Right. They have kind of their own separate culture from the mainland Italians. Beautiful island, by the way. Beautiful people.
Yeah.
And I'm traveling all around Sardinia, interviewing people, and I am hearing contemporary stories from people who have themselves dug up the bones of giants. And of course, the skeptics will say, no, they were digging up mastodons and giant sloths and so forth. No. There was a time in Sardinia when they were engaging in a process of industrialization, and they were updating their roads, and they were digging out foundations for buildings, and I think this began sometime around the 40s, and it continued for a few decades, and people were beginning to use mechanized forms of agriculture. So rather than the horse and plow, they were now getting tractors and digging deeper into their soil. And during this period of time, it was not uncommon for the people out there digging up their fields to, in the process of doing that, to unearth the bones of giants. And it was common knowledge. These were the old timers I was talking to, so a lot of these people have probably since passed away. One of the guys I talked to was like 101 years old, telling me stories like this. And I talked to dozens of people in Sardinia, and they would dig up these bones, and when they would dig up, let's say they're plowing their field with a tractor, they dig up skeletal remains, unusually large skeletal remains. They would always get excited, and the first thing that they would do is they would look for the hands. Why? Because oftentimes the hands had rings, the fingers had rings, golden rings or silver or precious jewels, and they wanted to take the rings. And
Classic Italians. They have a priceless discovery, and what do? They go for the gold.
Well, I'm Italian too. I'm Italian American, so we're not talking about giant sloths here. We're not talking about dinosaurs. Last time I checked, dinosaurs don't wear jewelry. And they would often find pendants around the neck, bracelets, and they would keep it quiet, obviously, because they didn't want people from the university to come and take the artifacts that they had discovered.
I love the idea, not to make too much light of this. It's very interesting, and I buy this. I was a little more skeptical on the green men, but I buy this stuff.
Gray
men. But I love the idea that the Sardinian giants, the Italian giants, unlike the Peruvian ones or whatever, the North American ones, they just look like my grandpa. Basically, they got like gold chains and bracelets and stuff.
And it was. I heard so many stories. I'll give you one example. There's a church in Sardinia, a very old church called Anastasia, and it's in the province of Sadara. And as is common around the world, Catholic churches and cathedrals are often built on top of temples, pagan temples.
Yeah, whatever the old one was.
Exactly. Yeah. And so a lot of Catholic churches are sitting on ruins. And certainly in Sardinia, this is the case.
Yeah.
And the Church of Anastasia is sitting on Nuragic ruins. And the Nuragic culture is a very ancient culture. It's very mysterious. I think it's Canaanitish. And the Nuragic people were megalith builders. They built over 30,000 megalithic towers on the island of Sardinia. On one island, over 30,000 megalithic towers in the Cyclopean style. Last time we talked about Cyclopean architecture, albeit cruder than what you find, for example, in Peru and Sacsayhuaman and so forth, which was the topic for our last discussion. And aside from the towers, there was also hundreds of megalithic tombs. And these tombs to this day are called the tombs of the giants. And the tombs and the towers, they're associated. Oftentimes you'll find, if you find a tomb of the giant, you'll find the remains of a tower, which are called nuragi. Nuragi are the towers. And some of these towers are 100 feet tall. Stone towers built in the Cyclopean megalithic style. And so the Church of Anastasia was built on top of one of these Nuragi complexes. And I interviewed two individuals who were hired by the university in Cagliari, the capital of the capital of Sardinia. They were hired to excavate at the site, and the procedure was that they were going to excavate the Nuragic ruins, the Nuragic ruins, in the vicinity of the church. The church is literally sitting right on top of the site. And it's just a small church, like a chapel almost. I've been there, and they would. The procedure was they worked at two different times. One worked from I don't recall off the top of my head the dates that they were there. I think one was late 80s, and then the other one worked in the early 90s. So they were not working contemporaneously. These are two different testimonies from two different individuals who worked two different periods of time at the same site.
Yeah.
And the procedure was that they would excavate the ruins, and all of the artifacts would go into the church. So they set up tables on the church, they would excavate the ruins, and whatever artifacts they found would be deposited into the church. Yeah. And then somebody mysteriously would come at night and remove all the artifacts. Well, they discovered lots of the typical Nuragic artifacts that one finds in Sardinia. But among these mundane artifacts, they were uncovering the bodies, the skeletal remains of giants, routinely. And when we say giants, we're talking individuals who are 9 to 15 feet tall, really. Let's say 9, 10, 11, and 12 feet tall, primarily, from their descriptions. And they described to me in great detail what they were discovering and how they would take the different parts of the body. Sometimes the skeletal remains were very well preserved, and they would deposit them in the church. I remember one of the individuals told me that his wife was working with him one day, and they're excavating, and they discovered this large skull, and it still had the vertebrae attached. And it was so large that it took both of them to carry it into the church. So he had the skull in his arms, and she was carrying the vertebrae, and they went and deposited it into the church. And sometimes they would find entire skeletons and lay them out in the church. He found 3 skeletons. I forget which of these two individuals found 3 skeletons together, and all of them were at least 9 feet long. And he even informed his bosses from the university, hey, I found these gigantic skeletons. What do I do with them? Because the church was getting filled up with artifacts. Yeah. They were extracting so many artifacts, the church was just getting filled up with artifacts. And the person informed him, lay the skeletons out in the yard next to the church. And they did that. They laid 3 skeletons out, 9 feet tall each, and the next morning they were gone. Both of these individuals, again, not working contemporaneously, one in the late 90s or one in the late 80s and the other in the early 90s at the same site. And they discovered, they unearthed gigantic chalices and gigantic plates. The one individual told me that they were trying to open, that they were excavating a tower, one of these, the remains of a Nuragic tower, and it was sealed, and they were able to open it up, and they went inside, and he said that when they walked inside with their flashlights or crawled inside, they were confronted with this gigantic humanoid sitting at a table, and he was dead. And he was very well preserved. It was like he was hermetically sealed inside of this. Whatever happened, he got hermetically sealed inside of this tower. And he's dead, seated at a gigantic table, sitting on a gigantic chair. And in front of him was a gigantic plate and a gigantic chalice. And on the plate were oysters that he had been eating. And he estimated that this guy had to be about 12 feet tall. And he was very well preserved. And they took that body and they laid it out in the church, and the next day it was gone. And he even told me one time, one of these particular individuals told me that they were running out of room to put the artifacts, because they were told strictly to put all of the artifacts in the church, except for in that case with those bodies.
Skeletons.
And they were getting frustrated because they were filling up the church with artifacts so quickly, they needed more space. So he went to talk to his boss. And he said, hey, we need another place to put artifacts. Can we is there like another building that we can rent or something? And this person, his boss, inexplicably became very agitated and told him, mind your effing business. Just put the artifacts in the church and shut your mouth.
A very Italian response.
And so he even told me, one of the individuals told me the name of a professor that they were working with from the University of Cagliari,
Now,
who was fully aware of what was being unearthed at the Church of Anastasia.
I want to know what happened with the giant skeletons and all the artifacts, but I've kept you too long, so I think that has to be the cliffhanger for our next conversation.
I've got a lot more stories about giants, so that's we'll have to do a part 3.
In the meantime, go get the book Birthright. Timothy Alberino. Thank you,
sir. My pleasure.